want to welcome everybody to this morning's presentation. Apparently the link I sent you is my link, which means we are all me. So if you see your name is Sean, that's why. You can imagine I get a lot of links and I try and share them appropriately, but apparently I shared the wrong one. But nonetheless, you're here. That's all that counts. And before we jump into it, what I'm going to do here is just do a quick introduction, as we always do. But I want to share something with you that has just been finalized this week. So consider this hot off the press. And I'd ask that you share this widely. We've announced a special event happening on Thursday, May 20th, starting at 10 a.m. Eastern and lasting until about 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's all about strengthening agility and resilience in the Canadian manufacturing supply chain. So if you've have anything to do with the supply chain, most of you do, you've realized that the pandemic and all the other various factors that have happened in the last 12 to 18 months here have created a lot of challenges. We've pulled together a lot of subject matter experts, including Peter Hall, who is the chief economist with Economic Development Canada. He's going to be one of our kickoff speakers. We're going to have several panel discussions that you'll be able to be involved in and engage in as well. So more to come. Watch your NGen newsletter, which will be coming out next week with further details and a chance to register. Registration is free. So share this as broadly as you'd like. The more, the merrier. But again, you can feel free to share this, the email that you get next week with anybody for them to join us. And if you have any questions at all, most of you have my email, feel free to reply. I'd be happy to get you an early invite to this special event. Again, Thursday, May 20th. So with that said, I've stopped sharing. I'm going to let Adel bring up his slides, and I'll do a quick introduction, and then we'll jump into today's presentation. So Adel, is it Gamar, Adel?
Correct.
Correct. All right. Adel Gamar, he's the CEO of GLG Limited, a boutique firm specializing in adaptive leadership, organizational strategy, and change management. He's driven to forge effective collaborations amongst business, government, and not-for-profit sectors while creating lasting and impactful solutions. So Adel has actually advised senior leaders in Fortune 500 companies, higher education, not-for-profits, governments, you name it. And he served as an educational specialist with UNESCO and policy fellow at Harvard Law School. While at Harvard, he taught adaptive leadership and negotiation and currently delivers, excuse me, I should slow down, executive level programs at UBC Sauder School of Business. And he's made appearances on television and radio, including Global News and CBC. Now, let me explain very briefly. Adel is one of the folks we've partnered with on our AMP Up leadership or our AMP Up program, if you will, which contains some leadership programs. So if you're not aware of AMP Up, you can check out our website. It's this ongoing catalog, if you will, of programs and training that we believe are very important for today, considering what's going on, obviously, in the world, but also for manufacturers today who are trying to figure out what is next and how they really progress and amp up their workforce. So I'd encourage you to check out our website under AMP Up, and you'll learn all about some of those programs. One of the programs is Transformational Leadership, and Adel has agreed to come today to speak to this very important topic. So we really appreciate, Adel, you joining us. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Sean, thank you. The privilege is all mine. To all the Seans on this panel, good morning from the West Coast. I'm dialing in right now, joining you from Coquitlam, the unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nations and the Coast Salish peoples. It is an honor, a privilege to be joining you today. I am coming to you as well as members from the Sauder School of Business, and I'm delighted to be able to share some time with you, about 45 minutes, to fulfill my task, which was sharing some insights around this framework called adaptive leadership. We'll look at a couple of concepts from this framework, particular to the here and now, and what industry experts, leaders like yourself are experiencing, not at the beginning of the pandemic, but currently. And what I also want to do is look at some of these techniques, strategies that leaders can learn, ways of adapting, responding, and leading during the pandemic, and to see this through beyond. I'm delighted to hear that Peter Hall will be joining you in the upcoming sessions. I'm delighted that the topic is around strengthening agility and resilience. I'll touch a little bit on resilience a little later, but I think that want to commend all of you for joining us, because you're taking time from your busy schedule to learn new tools new perspectives, and trying to figure out how to navigate through these challenges. So anytime I meet with executives that are looking to learn new skills and perspectives, I honestly see it as a privilege and an honor to be able to share some of my insights and what I've been observing pre-pandemic, but particularly during the times that we're experiencing now. I'm definitely going to be leaving some time for Q&A a little later. So please jot them down, and then we'll be able to have a healthy conversation in the last 10, 15 minutes of the time together. All right. So before I begin, I have to admit, leadership is a term that I see gets thrown around a lot and oftentimes misused. So given that I'm going to be talking about adaptive leadership, we'll deal with the adjective adaptive a little later. I'd like to know from you, how do you define leadership? And I invite you to put that in the chat. And then I'll prompt you a little later to answer this prompt, which is, can you please name 2 to 3 people that you consider leaders? So I'll stop sharing the screen just so that I can look at the chat. But how do you define leadership? Just to calibrate before we jump right in. So all the Sean's, and I see Rebecca. Rebecca changed her name. I think people have the capability of changing their names if they want to. But how do you define leadership? Just put it in the chat. Great, thank you. One of the Sean said, I don't know if this is the real Sean. With the real Sean, please stand up. Leadership is creating collaboration amongst your team to achieve organizational goals. Great. Leadership is aligning people to a common goal. I love it. And having a vision. Thank you, Rebecca. Any others? Being someone who others look up to, respect and support. So somebody who garners support and respect. Leadership is sacrifice. Wow. I'd love to hear more from the NGen webinar, who that is. This is so weird, not knowing who's who. Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, there are 3 dots in the box. Click on that. You can rename yourself to the name that was given to you. Great. Okay, so let's shift gears then. Can you give us some names, and preferably people that we would be able to identify in this group? Who do you define, or who do you identify as leaders? Right. Okay. Yeah. The Obamas, when I see an Obama and I say, yeah, I miss Obama and her husband too. But you've got both of them there. That's great. Nelson Mandela, others, keep them coming. And if you've already given 2 and you have a third, please feel free to put them in there. I'd like to see a Canadian name, at least one. Well, Barack Obama's sister, I believe, is Canadian. Jack Layton. Okay, great. Wayne Gretzky. Let's see if there's one more. And the reason I'm asking is it's really calibration to know who's in the room. And obviously we are in this virtual world, so it's hard for me to be able to chat and have dialogue with you, but just to know what your lens in terms of leadership. So I'm assuming that all of these would share some of the traits that you've identified as leadership. Sacrifice. Nelson Mandela made a major sacrifice, as we all know, was imprisoned for quite some time. Any of these people that you've mentioned, Michelle Obama, Wayne Gretzky, would have had to sacrifice time, energy to be able to really craft the skill that they were able to demonstrate to all of us. Great. Okay. So let me then continue. And now that I know where we are in terms of defining leadership, I always look at the roots of words just to give me a perspective on whoever the founding people were, where the etymology of the word, the origin of the word. And lo and behold, the word leadership, as often misused, I believe, just thrown at anybody and everything. A good speaker is a leader. A person who, could round up the troops is considered a leader. Some people often look at history and say even bad leadership is leadership. So Adolf Hitler tends to get on the list. Some that have taken the major sacrifice and died for a cause tend to be considered as leaders. Our history books, political science, is filled with people who have made a big sacrifice in terms of a cause that they were called to do. The root word of leadership comes from an Indo-European root, and I find this quite fascinating. It's a verb, and it means to thrust yourself forward and die. Morbid. It is seen as the original use of the word is that you have to be like a kamikaze, if you may, somebody who's willing to jump on the sword, to take one for the team. But take one for the team here isn't sit on the bench for a little or bunt the ball, or, it's actually coming to an end. And so the Nelson Mandelas, the Gandhis, the Martin Luther Kings, the Malcolm X's, who had to pay a sacrifice, tend to be considered historically as leaders to a particular cause because they've taken the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of whatever greater good that is. I don't want you to be leaders based on this definition of the word. When I advise executives, I want you to look at the challenge that you're trying to make progress on with a different lens, a different light, and know the ultimate sacrifice should not be your well-being, your mental health, your physical well-being, and certainly not your life. We see this time and time again where managers and executives take on so much more than they can bear. And this is pre-pandemic, folks. They take on more than they can bear, and it's expected of them. That's why we throw extra salaries on them. We give them a corner office. We give them privileges with the expectation that you're able to take on more, oftentimes more than you can bear. By the definition of leadership, they're fulfilling that role. I highly recommend that you don't take on more than bear where it is a detriment to your own well-being. So I find the definition of leadership quite revealing when we are listing people like the Mandelas and the Gandhis and the Obamas to be able to exhibit this capability of taking more than one can bear. I think all of you have the capacity, and you probably have been exhibiting leadership without the detriment of your own well-being, or so I hope. So let me then just share, what is this adaptive leadership? It's not just a fancy adjective in front of a misused or overused word. It's actually a framework that has been practiced and taught. People have been consulted using this framework for over 40 years. The work was established by two people, Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky from Harvard's School of Government, where policymakers, executives go there as in their executive education programs or as grad school students to learn this framework. It's one of the most coveted seminars or courses because they find that it's very refreshing and quite innovative in how you see leadership. So what is it supposed to do, or what's the aim of this framework? Really, it's looking at building capacity in people. And by people, it's not just those that are in this room right now. It's not the executives who are high up, top-down approach perspective. It is, how do you build capacity in the people that you are leading or that you're commissioned to manage, those that are directly reporting to you? The result of using this framework is that not a single person emerges as the Gandhi, the Michelle Obama, the Oprah Winfrey's, the people that gravitate towards. On the contrary, leadership is seen as our people building enough skills where they are building capacity to address complex challenges. More on that quite quick. I'll share it in a little bit. It's also looking at implementing systemic change. Change is the one constant. We've seen this before the pandemic. And frankly, with the pandemic, it has become a lot easier for me to consult using this framework because it's front and center in everybody's mind. COVID-19 has thrown everybody out of what normal used to be. And so how do you implement systemic change whereby you can survive these tumultuous and challenging moments. And then hopefully unlocking the company's potential, not only because it's part of your mission statement and your strategic plan, but also looking at innovative ways where you can actually pivot at a pace that people can tolerate. And at the end, you can actually come up more successful than you were previously. I've got a case, a manufacturing company that I think some of you might be aware of. And if not, regardless, it actually highlights very much these four objectives of the framework. In action, this is just one short list of industry in 3 sectors that have been or are currently utilizing this framework, where they're building capacity in their teams, thinking of leadership very differently than the traditional way, which is top down. All right, let me give you then 2 concepts. The framework is rich, it's deep, but I thought of just selecting 2 concepts that I think would be pertinent to this group, knowing your industry and your subject matter. The first thing is distinguishing challenges and problems, being that they are technical and adaptive. And then the second one is distinguishing authority, or what is also called management, executives, senior leadership, vice presidents. That is categorically what I'm going to refer to as authority, versus leadership, this lens of building capacity in people. In terms of the first one then, technical problems. To identify a technical problem, usually it's a very easy process. It's clear, it's easy to spot and identify. It's not ambiguous. A technical problem is quite familiar. It may be ranging from simple to complex. Simple being that your printer in the office ran out of ink. It's a problem. You press print, the paper is not printing. It's a technical problem within somebody's expertise and repertoire. You're able to fix it. But it can also range from the simple to complex. And complex, the first thing that comes to mind is open heart surgery. Very complex technical problem, yet it is within the realm of expertise. Somebody knows what to do. This is what they were trained to do. They went to school for or got training. They are experienced in a particular realm. It's a technical problem then. Solving it is tactile. It is tactical. It is needing time, resources, people, power. But again, it's a clear problem. You can identify it. It's within somebody's expertise. Whose responsibility is it in solving technical problems? Usually it falls on the shoulders of authority, i.e. management, somebody who's skilled, a department, somebody who has that in their repertoire. That's the responsibility on authority and experts to come in and step in. In the case of the photocopy machine, call a technician, or if you yourself have done this a couple of times, you can pretty much solve it. That's a clue that's a technical problem. In the case of open heart surgery, you need a surgeon who's been practicing this with the support and the tools to be able to do the open heart surgery. These are all just indicators of technical problems. The golden pawn in the middle is that authority, that subject matter expert, the person who you're calling on, and the black pawns around them are the people who are looking to authority, management, executives, the technician, whoever's expertise it is to solve this technical problem. That is pretty much the conduct of addressing technical problems. Identify the problem, it's clear, it's within somebody's repertoire, find that golden pawn or the multiple golden pawns whose job it is to fix or solve this challenge. I'm happy to ask you to think about technical problems within your organization right now. And so if you can put in the chat various technical problems that you might be experiencing in the here and now that are easy to identify, it's within somebody's subject matter expertise, there are easy fixes that you know. All it requires are resources, whether it be people or other various resources. And this is just my pulse check to see, are we clear on technical problems? Although it's clear and easy for me to explain. Let's see some examples in the chat. Great, love it. Yeah, implementation of something that people know. So CRM is one of them. You probably have expertise who can come in and train. You've got the technology to support it. Let's see at least one more. From anybody. I've got 3 Sean's in an NGen webinar, but let's look at that. If there's one more and you're typing it, we'll give you just 5 more seconds to plug that in. Okay, great. So technical problems clear. Now, I hope there's enough hint for you to assume, well, what is adaptive challenges? It's everything not technical. Adaptive challenges are elusive. They're actually difficult to even spot or identify. You bring in the executive team, senior leaders, and you say, what the heck is going on? And you might not get the same input. There are variations of what the challenge is. It's not like the case of the photocopier, paper is out, ink is out. There's an indicator saying ink is out. This is elusive. It's difficult to identify. That's a clue that it's an adaptive challenge, not a technical challenge. Another indication that you're dealing with adaptive challenge that it hasn't been solved with current context or the current people. You've hired new staff and new teams. There are different variations, different challenges that make it murky, makes it complex, makes it adaptive. Again, COVID has made it a lot easier for all of us to be able to say, okay, that's clearly an adaptive challenge, not a technical problem. There are no ready-made answers. And the solution, unlike the previous one, the golden pawn, find the authority, the executives, management, people who are trained. Adaptive challenges require all the stakeholders in the organization to make the progress. It's not on an individual's shoulders to be able to solve adaptive challenges. It is on the collective. And part of exercising leadership then is figuring out who is that group of stakeholders that you can bring together to figure out how to even identify what the challenge really is. Another thing about adaptive challenges is that because it's outside of our regular repertoire, it requires new learning. It requires you to think differently, to innovate, to make new, and it requires new behaviors, new patterns of behavior, which again, frankly, and be honest with you, I know how difficult and challenging that is, particularly in the industry that you are all in the industry sector, because you're used to one, it might be just a technicality of a product, getting it into market. And now all of a sudden, COVID has thrown everybody on a spinning, figuring out, well, how do we stay afloat, let alone support our staff and team and not let go of people. Adaptive challenges require the group to exercise leadership, not to find a leader, not to identify that golden pawn, that premier, that president, that executive who's going to have the magic pill. The responsibility rests on the shoulders of the stakeholders. And again, identifying who are the stakeholders that need to be in the room in that discussion. The diagram you see on the right indicates in the center the work. And the work here is that adaptive challenge. Framing a challenge for your team and your stakeholders is the first step in identifying how to make progress, how to innovate. And then bringing your team, whoever that is, and by no means am I suggesting your whole staff and everybody, because it could very well be just cacophony. It's not productive. It's venting. It's frustration. Being strategic on who do you need to bring into the conversation first, recognizing you cannot have the answers to adaptive challenges. It's not technical. It's very different. It's a new lens that you got to look at this at. Who do you need to be bringing in is part of the first stage of crafting how do you make progress and how do you exercise leadership. So you'll notice the dots around the work. One of them is you. You cannot be in the middle. And here's the other thing to be mindful about. Don't put somebody in the middle and begin blaming an individual, because you are then looking at this adaptive challenge as a technical challenge. If your photocopier is busted and you bring a technician and they weren't able to do the work, I would put the technician in the middle and say, that's the problem. Get a new technician. But if it's adaptive challenges, don't put a human being in the middle, because remember, this is not within the context of anybody's expertise. COVID is, again, a prime sample of that. The title at the top of this diagram is actually quite, I think, informative. And that is that why the distinction between technical and adaptive is because we've seen that the majority of leadership failure is a diagnostic failure. People assume challenges, lumping them all together as technical. And they are looking at the challenges as if it's just being tactical. Throw more money at it, find more resources, throw somebody under the bus, fire the CEO. If we just get a better coach, you guys are all in Ontario, the Leafs will have a better chance at winning the Stanley Cup. Okay, folks, you've hired and fired so many coaches. It hasn't gotten very well. Maybe we need to look at a different strategy than just hiring and firing, demoting, and then promoting. So diagnosing the challenge is a heavy lift. And this is why I hope you're comforted by this. You can't do this alone because it's not within your repertoire and expertise. So the distinction helps, I hope at least, to be able to reframe how you're looking at the challenge. So as you've now hopefully gotten the hint that I don't see leadership as positional. In perspective of my colleagues and I who look at leadership through the lens of adaptive leadership, it's not positional. Barack Obama, I don't know if he was a good leader just yet. I was happy and delighted and honored to serve under one of his advisors. And I know the one thing that he did very well is that he brought the people that needed to inform him and advise him. And one interesting trait that he did at the end of most of the meetings where he had his cabinet together is that he would say, what are we missing? And the pronoun we here is suggesting, I am going to miss it. We're all going to miss perspectives. Let's bring in more perspective. It's not about me as president. It's about us as a group. And so leadership is not positional. Rather, this is the view of leadership as I see it, specifically when we're looking at adaptive challenges, is that leadership is an activity where you're activating, engaging, and mobilizing a particular group of people. And here's the currency of success: to make some progress, not to make the problem go away, because if you are trying to make it go away, you're seeing the problem as a technical problem, as a misdiagnostic of the challenge. If it's adaptive, you're probably not going to see the problem go away forever. But can you make progress? March last year, we were hit with a pandemic. How would have been a perspective of an organization to say, we don't know what the end is going to be like, but what learning do we need to be making in the short term? What questions we need to be asking in the long term? And how long this might last, we actually still don't even know with the variants. Although I am a relentless optimist, I look at this as there's always light at the end, but how do you make progress? It's a process, it's not a golden pawn, it's not positional. At least that's the lens that I perceive exercising leadership in the realm of adaptive challenges. Again, if you have questions, please just post them. And if we were in a room, of course, we would have a bigger dialogue, but we'll save the Q&A for a little later. So you see, when exercising leadership, it looks different than the golden pawn. You have a group, selecting that group to figure out what do we need to be making and what learning can we be making in the process of exercising leadership. Peter Hall will be addressing you for those that are going to be checking in during that webinar. And I think it's wonderful that the title is Agility and Resiliency. And I think, again, I would always push back on these terms that get thrown around a lot. I think they're wonderful, but we have to define what they are. And one of the things that I have seen executives like yourselves and the view of resiliency is that they view it as a goalpost, as something that we just need to reach it and then it will be done. Looking at this from the adaptive leadership lens, you're seeing it more like a technical challenge then. If we can just get from here to here, it will be great. It will be over, it's done. I'd like to, and I'm offering this as a proposition, that what if we viewed resiliency not as a goalpost and an outcome, but rather a process? That the journey itself is the learning, is the building of capacity. The currency of success is, are we having better conversation than we first started? Are we able to take care of our people while at the same time meeting our bottom line? Do we build trust with each other? Are people feeling that they can come to me and raise questions, stick their neck out without feeling that there's going to be retribution? The process of learning, specifically now, is so critical when you're looking at exercising leadership. Why? Because remembering the work being at the center and you want to identify your team, you cannot have candid conversations around the challenge and utilizing the intelligence and the passion of your team without having this basic foundation, which is trust. And so resiliency is the process of building capacity. I see it as a better, healthier, and more productive conversation than assuming we just need to get to B and we'll be fine. It's more of a journey as opposed to an outcome. And we've seen this now. We keep pivoting, closing, opening. What does this mean to our staff, to our team, to our product and our services? And so pivoting is part of that capacity and that muscle. And if you've worked out, you would know, and I trust that people are taking care of their physical well-being, that when you work out, in order for you to build muscle, you have to rip muscle. And it hurts the next day, sometimes even 2-3 days later. And so that process of learning is painful, but it's still critical in order for you to build capacity, not only in your team, but for yourself. So how do you get to a place where you can have these conversations once you brought that critical team, the stakeholders who are required to exercise leadership together? A couple of ideas that I'd like to share with you, ways of prompting and beginning the conversation. By no means am I saying these are the only questions. I am suggesting that this is a conversation starter where you can bring that team together and help you look at what angles and how can you be addressing the current challenges during the pandemic, but really with any adaptive challenge. The first question is, and like anything in our own personal DNA as we've evolved as a human race, is that there's certain DNA that we have to preserve. And so just like our own DNA, looking at your organization, determine what practices are core to your team. What do you or must you be able to perform? Services to your team and or to your customers. The critical components of your organization that must be preserved is one process of identifying how do we move forward, is recognizing what do we need to keep. Likewise, what do you have to discard? What change must you make in regards to letting go of certain things? A hard call that many organizations had to make was letting go of people because it didn't make sense to their bottom line. I always ask them to not make that their first step, although that's part of their repertoire, seeing the challenge as a technical challenge. All we have to do is just let go of people so that we can make our bottom line. That's, if it's an adaptive challenge, again, look at it differently. Don't let that be your resort of common practice. But you still have to make the hard call. What are things that you have to discard in terms of services, in terms of resources, change that is required from your team? We found that people are not typically afraid of change. What people are typically afraid are the losses that are coupled because of that change, or that they're there due to that change. So if you have to commit to some losses, figure out what that is not productive to your team and organization. The last question that I'm suggesting and just tabling here for you as food for thought is, there's an opportunity here. And you probably heard a lot of catchphrases around opportunities and seizing it. Look at this as a way of, well, how can you pivot and innovate? It's a challenge, no doubt, requiring you to bring your stakeholders together. But with that critical mass, where can you innovate is an opportunity for you to pivot, but also tap into the intelligence and expertise so that you don't go to your default technical fixes by hiring or firing or demoting or letting go of people. Is where can you seize an opportunity to actually use the technical know-how that you have, the people power that you have, and pivot in a way that helps your organization thrive. Notice the picture. It's not the executive sitting at the head of the room, a table, calling the shots. You need to be bringing these people. Again, it is then identifying who do you need to have those conversations with. It doesn't have to be a dozen people. It could very well start with one or two, but composing that team where it's productive conversation with a lens on how do we see this challenge as it truly is, adaptive, not clear, is, I think, a wonderful first step. I want to share with you a case. And looking at these 3 questions, I didn't have to go far from home. But before I do, the final line here is don't do this work alone. If you are having these conversations in your own head, know that you're seeing this as a technical challenge, resorting to your own expertise. That's a bad diagnostic. Don't default to your own frontiers of learning. You need to stretch yourself, and part of the stretch is actually admitting you have no clue on how to deal with this. So admit it. Build that trust with your team. Don't do this work alone if it's adaptive. If it's within your regular repertoire, great, resort to it. Otherwise, bring your team. Again, I didn't have to go far to get this case. Nova Textiles, which I believe NGen praised them and published maybe an article or highlighted how they pivoted during COVID. So this is a manufacturing company not far from where I live in my home city of Coquitlam. So it's based here in Coquitlam, and they pivoted their production. They started by producing pet beds. And I laugh because how odd is it to shift and start making these? The owner of Nova Textiles brought his team together and began having these hard conversations ahead of time. It's wonderful to find cases like this because they did it without calling me or anybody that practices this framework. It's just there are people who are already putting this into practice. But they started off as making pet beds, and they realized, okay, people are not buying as many pet beds. And wait a minute, our country is going on lockdown. And wait a minute, here's an opportunity. So they had those conversations. What do we need to keep? We need to keep our staff working. They didn't fire anybody. What do we have? We have resources. We have a place where we can manufacture things. We're here on the West Coast. They looked at their resources. What do we need to let go? They stopped making pet beds. And what's the innovation? Let's make some face masks. People need them. And so they pivoted so quickly. And I love the comment that the founder or the owner here, Jason, had said, which is everyone, my staff, my team, everyone came together. They worked together to get to the point that they were in, making these face masks. NGen, I believe, didn't recognize Jason Zanata and his team for this. They recognized them for something that actually they ended up growing even more. They partnered, which is always wonderful, partnership across the country in your home province of Ontario, in Windsor. And they partnered with Harbor Technologies, and they developed a very innovative thing that has never been made in Canada, cup molded respirator masks. They won a grant from the federal government, support from the feds to innovate. They won, I think, $1 million for this. And now they're aiming to make 5 million masks, which is really a wonderful, wonderful case for us to look at. The president of BC Alliance here of manufacturers here in BC said that they created a new standard, sets a benchmark for Canadian manufacturers. And I believe he's absolutely right. It is, how do you pivot in a productive way, not letting go of your people, preserving your staff, while at the same time pivoting and innovating and being able to help at a time of need. It's a wonderful case. I'm not assuming that all of you are able to pivot in the way Jason Zanata and his team has been able to do. But can you have those critical questions before defaulting to a technical fix to an adaptive challenge? Assuming that all we have to do is let go of our people or stop creating or manufacturing a certain thing. It is, how do we create a new, innovate, while supporting the teams that are looking to us for support and to exercise leadership. So it's a framework, it's a perspective, it's a lens through which you see challenges to be able to maximize the team, the people that you have, to not put the burden on your shoulders to fulfill the definition of leadership, to thrust yourself forward to your own detriment, but rather looking at your people, your team, looking at how do you address these current challenges while recognizing that the process of resiliency requires you to learn, requires you to humble yourself in that we don't know when we're going to clear this, but can we have measures of success by making some progress? And pivotal to that is learning and collaborating with your teams. So I look forward to the conversation. I think we're pretty early, but I wanted to make sure that we leave enough time and space to discuss. In the case we run out of time, I think in the last slide I can't see, but I'll be sharing the slide deck with Sean. Sean, I trust that. Feel free to please share it with the participants here. But you can reach me by email if there's a further question, or obviously stay in touch through LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn, in the case your question is not answered. The plug that I've been asked to do is probably later, but I think it's a good time for me to mention. I'm delighted to be joining you again on April 29th. And the hope is that we can have a round table. If people are interested, and you can let me know through the questions or put it in the chat, what I typically do is that I actually use a case in point way of analyzing the challenges. So I ask executives, people that I work with, and I'm extending it to you, is that between now and April 29th, I'm happy to share a case consultation guide where it helps you begin to have first a conversation with yourself, potentially with your team, on figuring out and identifying what are the adaptive challenges you're experiencing now, to begin answering some of those three questions. What do we keep? What do we discard? How do we innovate? And then you can bring those cases forward during that April 29th meeting where we can have a more robust conversation, not just theory, terminology, and nice examples, but you become that case where we can help diagnose the challenge and hopefully look at action items that you can employ. If you are interested in that process, then I'll share with you a case consultation guide, and then you can have time to draft something, send it to me ahead of time, and then that will help us get through a more robust conversation in the limited time that we'd have together at the roundtable. Another option is just no case and let's just come together and discuss them if that's more productive for you all. That's all I have. I'll turn it over to Sean, and you can then get us going on the conversation.
Yeah, that sounds great, Adel. So thank you very much for that. Appreciate it, and appreciate the interactivity. There was a couple of questions that were sent in by a couple of folks that couldn't join us that I wanted to start with. The first is, and you've addressed this a little bit, but I'll still ask the question and it gives you a chance to elaborate a bit. The question was, considering COVID and the stress that COVID has placed on a lot of leaderships today, regardless of whether they're in manufacturing or otherwise, what would be your ideas to be able to be adaptive despite all of these distractions? I mean, you even see folks that have joined us here saying, oh, this has been great, but I got to go because I got to prep for 12 o'clock call. And the number one issue people have said with working remotely is there's no more space between meetings. It's meeting. So this level of stress, it seems that, I would guess a lot of leaders are facing. How would you approach this framework considering we're kind of in these uncharted times right now?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, profound question. And man, I wish people just hung out a little longer and didn't have a meeting right after this. But yeah, what a reality that we're in right now. I mean, one thing that I actually started to notice, Sean, is I began to meet with executives in person, but obviously keeping distance. And I've noticed that people are having a harder time keeping eye contact now. We've gotten so used to not looking at the camera because that's so odd, which I'm doing right now. I'm looking at a green dot. So are you. So we're not even looking at each other. We're just looking at a green dot, or we're looking down at the various boxes. And then when we're finally going to be meeting in person, are people going to have a hard time even keeping eye contact? So the question is, how do you take care of yourself? One thing that is important using this framework is recognizing that the challenge is not yours and yours alone to solve. And so hopefully there's a sense of liberation that, okay, if it's not technical challenges within my technical expertise, it's adaptive, it requires me to bring people in. Figuring out who those people are becomes then allies, where you can then begin to make some progress on the adaptive challenges. Beyond the allies, we need confidants, people that are outside of the system, that we can tap to, whose shoulder we can cry on, people that we can resort to, whose interests are not the corporate organization. Their interest is solely for us. So it's the 1P that I highly recommend having, which is people around you to support you. We need them before the COVID-19 pandemic. We need them even now. The second P, and there are 3 Ps, because it's just easy to remember. The second P is that we need places that we can anchor ourselves in. That place could be a park, a trail, it could be your balcony, it could be a yoga mat. Hopefully it's not a bar stool. It is a place where you can anchor yourself to rejuvenate yourself so that you can go back and not personalize the work and begin to, again, engage the teams on that adaptive challenges. So you need people, confidants to support you, whose shoulder you can cry on, who you can really be able to share the angst and the hardships that we're experiencing. That could be a coach, it could be a mentor, it could be a partner. Places, and also then the third P is practices. And this could be an exercise, a walk, meditation, a prayer, a litany, but we need to have practices more now than we did before. And it could honestly be, and I'll be open with the people here, and I know this is recorded, that just before this call, I had a call just prior, but stepping outside, going for a 5-minute walk, taking in this wonderful warm air into my lungs just to come back and rejuvenate so I'm prepared for this call. These 3 Ps is one highly recommended way for us to anchor ourselves in order for us not only to take care of ourselves, which is the primary asset, but so that we're not thrusting ourselves to our own detriment, so that we can build capacity in our teams and see some progress.
Great, thanks, Adel. And I'm jealous that you actually have warm air to bring into your lungs, because I think
I know, I heard you guys got snow, man.
Yeah, it's still actually snowing a little bit here. The other question that was sent in was around using this framework for leaders that are trying to mentor and develop their team. So if they're looking at somebody who's a high performer saying, hey, this could be a future leader in the company, how could they, or what are some tips you have so that they could help this person adopt that framework as part of their development?
That's a great question. So highlighting, underscoring, bolding the concept of don't do adaptive work alone. Bring your team in. And if you have somebody who's a rising, emerging leader, as a term that's often given to young people who are young in the company and about to grow to higher responsibility, is share the critical questions with them. They could very well be the very people you need to pull in to ask the hard question. What are we missing? What do we need to discard? What do you think we should be innovating? Giving the work back, and by work, it's the adaptive challenge, giving the work back to your people and staff, those critical components of building capacity is a strategic initiative. And I think if you've got somebody who has the pedigree and the ambition and aspiration to do great things, you probably want to start with them.
That's great. Thank you very much. We'll see if there's other questions. I don't want to dominate the airways here. So
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm webinar. Also known
Hey,
as,
and then webinar.
also known as Frank DeFalco. Excellent presentation, Adel. Thank you. One of the things I was mentioning, you mentioned earlier about how people aren't afraid of change, but I don't know, you know, like I had a hard time, and it's still, as I'm thinking about it, I find people are extremely fearful of change. They may say they, in a kind of like, oh, we like change, but really they don't. I've come across that with particularly companies. We see them when we're trying to get them to adopt new processes and new technologies and different ways. When they like, it's always worked for us, we're going to keep doing it, it's worked fine. My question is how do you eliminate that fear of change? You say that they're not scared, but I'm going to disagree a little bit on that. But
That's
I
okay.
think they are scared. Yeah, that's my question.
What's the lotto in Ontario? Here we call it BC Lotto. What is it called in Ontario?
Lotto, Ontario. Yeah, I think it's Lotto.
Okay, very simple. Lotto, Ontario. Okay, so let's assume you got a ticket and it was a winning ticket and you were awarded $1 million. Would you say that that's change? Is there change going to come with that lotto ticket?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, great. Your expenditures, you're going to buy a couple of things that you probably wouldn't have bought if you didn't win the lotto ticket. There's change that's going to come with winning that lottery ticket. How many people do you think would say, you know what? No, I'm afraid of that change. I don't want that change. I'm assuming not a lot.
Fair enough, but you're giving an example of obvious reward. Okay.
Right. So
when you're coming into changing into the workforce, often, like, and I'm not trying to, I know we're talking about leadership here, but often people have heard the camouflage language, that change, which they mean is restructuring, we're selling out, these sorts of things. So people do fear that language, I think. And as a leader, I absolutely think it's imperative to change and adapt and all that. And you do want to get everybody to follow. And I know that's essentially what this is all about, but it's that elimination of that fear that I'd like.
So this is where it's wonderful to get a case, but let's just say this whole restructuring is part of a necessary change. By no means am I going to argue that avoid change at all cost. But what happens, generally speaking, is that an organization, and it usually comes from the top down, executives need to make the hard decision to let go of people or whatever required change because it's necessary, needs to be implemented. Exercising leadership isn't about, well, how do I, just email them and give them the news? Exercising leadership here, I'm offering or suggesting that, how do you cushion the fall that is critical and necessary for people to embrace? That is the losses that are going to be part and parcel of the change is important to be addressed, and it's oftentimes neglected. Cushioning that fall, recognizing that there will be a loss for people, even simply as saying, look, it's out of my hands. It is a necessary evil. We have to be restructuring for whatever reasons the organization is going through. So if we recognize that people are not afraid of change per se, but if there is something that they're going to be losing because of that change, that's some capacity that we need to be building in people, is recognizing there's going to be a loss, whether we sit with them and talk with them or finding other ways to cushion the fall. I'm arguing or suggesting that is part of a critical component of exercising leadership. Meeting people where they are and recognizing that this is hard for them. And that default isn't, well, figure it out, go and pivot, find another job. We had to make the hard call. Well, fine, but you're seeing it as a technical challenge then. You're dealing with people's lives and they've got other responsibilities that are dependent on this very decision that was just being made, albeit important decision. Is that helpful in any way?
I think that's great.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Appreciate that, Adel. Yeah.
Appreciate
That's good. Appreciate it very much. So if there's no other questions, we're going to just put a quick poll up here. Before we do that, I just want to, again, thank you, Adel, for joining us here today. And as you mentioned, we're going to have a roundtable event that we're going to put out to everybody for next Thursday, where we can continue this discussion. So appreciate you being willing to join us for that. Again, and thank you to UBC Sauder School of Business for supporting us with this webinar and helping us connect with yourself and bring this forward. For those interested, please check out the NGen website under AMP Up, and you will find this program amongst dozens of others that can help you upskill and amp up your workforce for today's advanced manufacturers. So with that said, again, I want to thank you very much, Adel, for joining us. Thank everybody else for joining us. And we just want to put a quick poll up, which will help us gain your feedback on how to ensure that these ongoing What's Next presentations are relevant, they're helpful, and they contain the topics that you really want to hear about. So I'd really ask if you just it should take you all of 22 seconds for those joining us to participate in this panel. Again, the poll, excuse me, and it's just going to help us continue to frame these. So with that said, we will leave on that note. Thank you very much, Adel, for your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing everybody again next Thursday. Watch your email. I'll be sending out a copy of this recording, as well as a link for everybody to join us next Thursday if you're interested. So thanks again. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.